The living room smelled of jollof rice and fried plantain as the family gathered around the long wooden table. It was a typical Sunday dinner at their mother's house in Abuja, a place where siblings came together to share food, laughter, and gossip. Plates clattered, children ran around, and uncles debated politics between mouthfuls. At first, the evening felt warm and familiar, until Ngozi's sharp voice cut through the chatter. "Amara still jobless?" she asked, her eyebrow arched, her tone laced with mockery. The words landed like a stone in the middle of the table. A few cousins chuckled nervously, while others looked down at their food. Ngozi leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, flashing her gold wristwatch like it was a trophy. She didn't stop there. She launched into a performance, bragging about her corporate promotions, her big salary, her weekend in Dubai. Each detail seemed rehearsed, delivered with the precision of someone used to commanding attention. Then came the eye roll, the exaggerated sigh. "Some of us are busy making real money," she added, sending a pointed glance at Amara. Amara felt her chest tighten, but she forced herself to stay quiet. She pushed rice around her plate, her face calm though her heart was burning. Every laugh around the table felt like another slap, another reminder of how little her family thought of her dream. She swallowed hard, choosing silence over argument. Inside, though, the humiliation carved deep. She knew she would never forget that dinner. That night, the streets of Abuja were quiet, but inside Amara's head, the noise was unbearable. Every word Ngozi had thrown at her replayed like a cruel recording. Jobless. Dreamer. Lazy. She walked slowly, her sandals scraping against the dusty road, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if she could hold back the sting. The night air was cool, but her face burned with shame. She wanted to cry out, to defend herself, but at the dinner table she had swallowed it all. Now the silence of the street became her place to bleed. When she finally reached her small apartment, she didn't even turn on the light. She sat on the edge of her bed and let the tears come, hot and silent, slipping down her cheeks in the dark. Her chest ached, but in the middle of the pain, a stubborn fire flickered. She wiped her face roughly, as if to erase the memory of Ngozi's laughter. Amara reached for the old notebook on her desk, the one filled with sketches, plans, and half-scribbled ideas. She hugged it tightly, like it was the only thing in the world that truly understood her. No one knew how many nights she had spent bent over it, coding on a borrowed laptop, sketching business models while surviving on nothing but noodles and black tea. No one had seen her send out proposal after proposal, praying for just one reply. What her family didn't know was that for months she had been in secret talks with international investors. The calls, the endless emails, the rejections that turned into cautious maybes. She had lived it all in silence. She hadn't told them because she wanted proof before speaking, something real she could put on the table. She pressed her palm against the cover of the notebook and whispered into the darkness, her voice trembling but sure. "Tomorrow they'll see." It wasn't just a promise. It was a vow. The laughter that had humiliated her tonight would fuel her tomorrow. The same people who mocked her would one day clap the loudest. And as she lay back, staring at the ceiling, her tears dried into determination. Sleep didn't come easy, but the fire inside her kept her awake, burning, waiting for her moment. Before the glow of contracts and emails, there was only struggle. Amara's journey had been anything but smooth, and it started far from the laughter-filled dining table. Years earlier, she had been in Maiduguri, standing under the hot sun, selling small handmade crafts at the roadside just to scrape enough for food. Her hands were always busy, braiding, weaving, stitching, but her mind was somewhere else, dreaming of technology, of a future bigger than the dust-filled market stalls around her. She would count her few naira at night, then quickly tuck it away, saving for internet access or a borrowed laptop session at a tiny cybercafe. There were nights when she had no dinner at all, only a cup of black tea to keep her awake. She would sit hunched over a borrowed laptop, typing lines of code while generators roared in the background and mosquitoes whined at her. The screen light was her only companion, her eyes burning from exhaustion but her heart refusing to stop. It didn't matter that her chair was broken or that the internet cut off every few minutes. She kept building. When she tried to take her idea to the banks, she faced rejection after rejection. 14 different banks told her no. Some laughed politely, others dismissed her before she could even finish her pitch. Too risky, they said. Too unrealistic. Each rejection stung, but instead of breaking her, it hardened her resolve. She told herself that every no was just one step closer to the yes she needed. Her family didn't see those sacrifices. They only saw her coming home late, tired, with no obvious results. To them, she was wasting her time. Lazy, they called her, shaking their heads as though she had no direction. But Amara knew better. She was planting seeds, even if no one else believed it. Her dream was clear in her heart, to build a company that connected rural farmers to real buyers, to create a bridge between forgotten villages and the global market. She had seen too many farmers lose out, their crops rotting because no one would buy them at a fair price. She wanted to change that story, and she was willing to bleed for it. Every sleepless night, every rejection, every moment of hunger was fuel. It was proof that her dream was not built on fantasy, but on sacrifice. She carried those scars quietly, never showing them at family gatherings, never announcing them on social media. To everyone else, she looked like a dreamer with nothing to show. But deep inside, Amara was building something stronger than their laughter. She was building the foundation of a legacy. Ngozi loved attention the way some people loved air. Every weekend, she made sure her life looked like a glossy magazine cover. She walked into restaurants in Abuja carrying her designer handbag, heels clicking against the tiled floors, greeting people like she was royalty. If the waiter didn't rush to her table quickly enough, she would sigh loudly, just to remind everyone that she was important. Her Instagram page sparkled with photos of champagne glasses, vacation selfies, and luxury shopping bags lined up neatly on her bed. Her followers clapped in the comments, calling her boss lady. And Ngozi soaked it all in like sunlight. Behind closed doors, though, her confidence was sharp and cruel. Over late-night drinks with friends, she often brought up her younger sister. Amara will end up a burden, she said casually, swirling her wine glass. Her friends laughed, not realizing how deep the words cut. To Ngozi, success wasn't about building anything lasting. It was about being seen, being envied, being the loudest in the room. She truly believed she had won the game of life. A steady corporate salary, business-class flights, imported perfume. These were her trophies. When relatives praised her at family gathering, she smiled sweetly, but carried herself with the smugness of someone who thought she was untouchable. In her eyes, Amara was the opposite, invisible, broke, and living in a fantasy world of ideas. But what Ngozi didn't know was that her sister's silence wasn't weakness. It was preparation. While she was busy curating the perfect image for social media, Amara was in quiet meetings with international investors, drafting contracts that could change her life forever. The world Ngozi worshipped, status and show, was about to feel very small compared to the scale of what was coming. If Ngozi had paused for even a moment, she might have noticed the quiet fire in her sister's eyes, the way Amara carried that old notebook like it contained treasure. But she never looked closely. She was too busy posting her next soft life caption. Her cruel confidence made her blind. She thought she was standing on a mountain, while Amara was still at the bottom. What she didn't realize was that her sister was climbing a higher mountain altogether, one that would soon cast a shadow over all her champagne weekend. The room was dark except for the dim glow of Amara's phone charging by her bedside. She had tried to sleep, but her mind kept running through endless to-do lists, business plans, and unanswered email. Then, at exactly 2 a.m., her phone buzzed. At first, she thought it was just another spam message, but when she saw the sender's name, her heart skipped a beat. It was the South African venture firm she had been negotiating with for months. Her hands trembled as she unlocked the screen. The subject line read, "Final Investment Agreement." For a moment, she just stared, hardly breathing. Could this really be it? She tapped the email open, and as the words filled the screen, her eyes blurred with tears. It was real. $40 million. An official contract, clean and detailed, waiting for her signature. Amara covered her mouth with her hand, a sob breaking out of her chest. She had imagined this moment so many times, alone in her tiny room, whispering prayers, pushing through rejection after rejection. And now, the deal that once felt like a faraway dream was sitting right there in her inbox. She wiped her face quickly, afraid her tears might blur the screen, then pressed the button to sign digitally. Her name appeared on the contract, sharp and final. It was done. She leaned back against the wall, phone still glowing in her hand, her whole body shaking. The very thing she had been mocked for, the late nights, the stubborn persistence, the dreamer lifestyle, had just turned into the biggest victory of her life. She thought of Ngozi's laughter at the dinner table, the cousins' whispers, the way her family had doubted her. And now, all of it seemed so small compared to this moment. Clutching her phone to her chest, she whispered through tears, "Thank you." It wasn't just money. It was validation. It was proof that she hadn't been crazy, that all her sacrifices had a purpose. She thought of the farmers she wanted to help, the platform she wanted to build, the lives that would change because she didn't give up. Amara finally allowed herself to smile, a wide, trembling smile that felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. She didn't post it online, didn't call anyone immediately. She sat there in silence, listening to her own heartbeat, soaking in the miracle. The world didn't know it yet, but history had just shifted in her tiny room at 2 a.m. And soon everyone, including Ngozi, would see what persistence can do. Morning light slipped through the curtains as Amara stood in front of her mirror. She didn't wear anything fancy, just a clean blouse, simple trousers, and her hair neatly tied back. But something about her looked different. Her face carried a glow, a quiet confidence that came from knowing the world had changed overnight. She picked up the slim folder from her desk, the one that held the signed $40 million contract, and tucked it carefully under her arm. For the first time in years, she felt no rush, no panic, only calm. As she walked through the streets of Abuja toward her mother's house, she noticed how the city bustled like always, hawkers shouting, kiki riders weaving through traffic, children rushing to school. But to Amara, everything felt sharper, brighter, as if the world itself was celebrating with. She smiled to herself, thinking about the scene she was about to walk into. At her mother's house, the same familiar voices floated out before she even stepped inside. Laughter, clinking cups, the cousins' chatter. In the sitting room, Ngozi sat proudly at the center, sipping tea as if she were the star of a talk show. She was already in full performance mode, telling the cousins about her weekend plans in Lagos, the new handbag she wanted to buy, and how exhausting it was to always be in demand. Everyone nodded along, amused by her stories. Then Amara entered quietly, greeting her mother and settling into a seat. No one paid her much attention at first. Ngozi barely glanced her way, too busy talking about herself. But Amara didn't mind. She simply placed the slim folder on the center of the table and opened it, revealing the neat pages inside. The cousins leaned forward out of curiosity. Her mother tilted her head. Ngozi, mid-sentence, stopped and frowned. Amara slid the top sheet forward, letting the bold numbers catch the light. $40 million. The room fell silent. The laughter, the chatter, even Ngozi's confident tone, all of it disappeared in an instant. Everyone's eyes were locked on the papers. Amara said nothing. She didn't need to. The figures spoke louder than any defense she could have given. Ngozi's hand, the same hand that had been waving dramatically while she bragged a moment ago, now trembled as she reached for the document. Her eyes scanned the page quickly, then again slower, as if she couldn't trust what she was seeing. The tea in her cup rippled from the shake in her grip. The cousins began to murmur. Her mother pressed her hand against her chest, staring at Amara with wide eyes. And Amara? She just sat there calmly, her lips curving into the faintest smile. She had no need to boast, no need to explain. The power had shifted without her uttering a single word. The same table where she was mocked was now the table of her triumph. Ngozi stared at the papers as if they were written in another language. Her lips twitched, then she let out a short, nervous laugh. "Please," she said, waving her hand. "This must be some kind of joke. Amara? $40 million? Come on." Her voice cracked, but she forced a smile, glancing around at the cousins for backup. A few laughed softly with her, unsure of what to believe. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms tightly. These documents are fake. Anyone can print fancy papers these days. Maybe she downloaded some random file online. Her words were sharp, but the tremble in her voice betrayed her. She was clinging to denial like a drowning person clutching at air. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply unlocked her phone, scrolled calmly, and placed it on the table for everyone to see. The email confirmation from the South African firm glowed brightly on the screen, complete with signatures, seals, and timestamps. She swiped again, showing the signed NDAs, then tapped one more time to reveal the official press release already spreading across business news outlets. The cousins leaned closer, their eyes widening. One whispered, $40 million. Amara? Another covered his mouth in disbelief. A younger cousin muttered, "This is real?" The room buzzed with shock, each whisper cutting deeper into Ngozi's pride. Ngozi's face drained of color as she stared at the phone. She wanted to protest again, but the evidence was undeniable. The emails were real. The news articles were already live. Investors' names were there in black and white. This wasn't a fantasy. This was happening, and it was her sister, the same sister she had mocked, who had done it. Her hand shook so much she set her teacup down before she spilled it. She tried to laugh again, but this time it came out hollow, shaky. No, this can't be. Not Amara," she whispered, almost to herself. But the room wasn't listening to her anymore. All eyes had shifted to Amara, who sat there quietly, her calmness louder than any speech she could have given. Their mother pressed both hands to her face, tears welling in her eyes. The cousins kept murmuring, their admiration growing by the second. Amara didn't need to say a word. The contrast was clear. Ngozi's loud boasting against Amara's quiet, solid proof. For the first time, Ngozi's voice no longer controlled the room. Her denial collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth, and she sat frozen, her pride crumbling before the very people she once used as her audience. The silence in the room didn't last long. Once the shock settled, the cousins began buzzing with excitement. They leaned toward Amara, asking questions, their voices filled with disbelief and admiration. "So it's true?" one cousin asked. $40 million? Amara, this is huge. Another cousin, who used to laugh at Ngozi's jokes about her, now looked at her with wide, respectful eyes. The same mouths that once mocked her were now praising her. Their mother, who had sat quietly for most of the scene, suddenly broke down in tears. She pressed her hands together, rocking slightly as she looked at Amara. "My child, I am so sorry. I doubted you. I thought you were wasting your time. Forgive me." Her voice cracked, but it carried the weight of years of misunderstanding. Amara stood up gently, walked to her, and held her hands. "It's okay, Mama," she said softly. "You'll see, this is only the beginning." Around the table, the shift was undeniable. Everyone was now leaning in Amara's direction, hanging on to her words, asking how she did it, what her plans were, and how they could support her. The energy that once fueled Ngozi's bragging now belonged to Amara, and she didn't even have to raise her voice to get it. Ngozi, meanwhile, sat stiff in her chair, her face red with embarrassment. The attention that had always been hers was slipping away, replaced by whispers that no longer centered on her handbags or trips abroad. For the first time, she wasn't the star of the family gathering. She tried to speak, but her words came out tight and bitter, drowned by the admiration flowing toward her sister. Finally, with a frustrated sigh, she pushed back her chair so hard it scraped against the floor. "Enjoy your little moment," she snapped, standing up. "We'll see how long it lasts." Without waiting for a reply, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, leaving behind an awkward silence that quickly shifted back into warmth around. Their mother hugged her tightly, cousins clapped her on the back, and some even pulled out their phones to show her the press release already trending online. "You're making history," one cousin said with a grin. Amara sat there, calm and glowing, remembering how just days ago this same table had been filled with laughter at her expense. Now, the same relatives who sided with Ngozi looked at her with pride and respect. The power between the sisters had flipped completely. Amara didn't gloat, didn't brag. She didn't need to. Her success spoke for her. For the first time, the dreamer who was ridiculed was the one everyone admired, and the memory of that dinner table humiliation felt like a distant echo. Amara didn't waste time celebrating. With the $40 million investment, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The first step was launching her company, AgroLink Africa. It wasn't just a tech platform. It was a bridge between forgotten farmers in rural villages and buyers across cities and even other countries. For years, farmers had struggled to sell their crops fairly, often cheated by middlemen or losing produce to spoilage. Now, with just a mobile phone, they could list their goods, connect with real buyers, and receive payment securely. The impact was immediate. In villages where people once thought technology was out of reach, farmers gathered around phones with wide eyes, watching as their yams, tomatoes, and grains were purchased by buyers hundreds of miles away. Some cried tears of relief, others broke into dance. Amara traveled across Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, meeting farmers face to face, listening to their struggles, and training them on how to use the platform. She didn't arrive in luxury cars or wear flashy clothes. She came simply, sitting under trees with the farmers, speaking their language, eating their food, and showing them that she hadn't forgotten where she came from. News outlets across the continent picked up the story. Headlines called her the woman who gave farmers a global voice. Universities invited her to speak. Young entrepreneurs looked up to her as proof that persistence pays. What started as one woman's impossible dream was now a movement lifting entire communities. Back in Abuja, the contrast between the sisters grew sharper. Amara's name was spreading across Africa, attached to real impact and respect. Meanwhile, Ngozi's once enviable lifestyle began to crumble. The designer bags and champagne weekends hit a truth she could no longer escape. Debts piling up, credit cards maxed out, and a job that no longer gave her the same thrill. The followers on her Instagram still clapped for her soft life captions, but envy gnawed at her as she watched Amara's face appear on TV, celebrated not for showing wealth, but for creating it. At family gatherings, the relatives who once rushed to hear Ngozi's stories now surrounded Amara instead, eager for updates about AgroLink Africa. Their mother beamed with pride, often tearing up as she introduced Amara to neighbors as "my daughter," the one helping farmers. Ngozi felt the shift deeply. For years, she had lived for applause, but now the applause belonged to her sister. And this time it wasn't shallow. It was respect carved from hard work and sacrifice. Amara didn't rub it in. She stayed humble, focused on her mission. She knew her success wasn't about revenge. It was about impact. Every time a farmer smiled while holding their first fair payment, she knew she was building something bigger than herself. AgroLink Africa wasn't just a company. It was a legacy in motion, proof that the girl once mocked as jobless had changed the story for thousands across Africa. The hall in Lagos glittered with lights as guests filled the grand launch event. Investors in sharp suits sat beside farmers in traditional, where the very people whose lives were already changing because of AgroLink Africa. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and the air buzzed with excitement. Everyone was waiting for the woman who had turned ridicule into a revolution. When Amara finally stepped on stage, dressed simply but glowing with quiet pride, the room erupted in applause. She didn't rush. She took her time, scanning the faces before her. Farmers who once struggled to sell their crops, investors who believed in her vision, and journalists ready to carry her words across the continent. She lifted her glass, her voice steady but full of emotion. "They mocked me for being jobless," she said, pausing as the crowd listened closely, "but I was busy building jobs for others." The room exploded with cheers. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing the moment. Farmers rose to their feet, clapping until their palms ached. Investors nodded, some even raising their own glasses in respect. It wasn't just a toast. It was a declaration, a reminder that dreams, no matter how small or lonely, can grow into something that changes lives. By the next morning, clips of her speech were everywhere, on TV, on social media, in newspapers. Across Africa, people shared her words, calling her story an anthem for anyone who had ever been laughed at for daring to dream. Amara stood at the center of it all, no longer the silent sister at the dinner table, but a voice of resilience for an entire generation.